You are connected, and you are listening to Specifically for Seniors, the podcast for those in the Remember When generation. Today's podcast is available everywhere you listen to podcasts and with video at Specifically for Seniors YouTube channel. Now, here's your host, Dr. Larry Barsh.
Today's guest on Specifically for Seniors is a man who can actually use the word gnomology in a sentence. James Geary is the deputy curator of the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard and former editor of the European edition of Time magazine. He is the author of 5 books: Wit's End, What Wit Is and How It Works and Why We Need It; I Is an Other, The Secret Life of Metaphor and How It Shapes the Way We See the World; Geary's Guide to the World's Great Aphorists; the New York Times bestseller, The World in a Phrase, A Brief History of the Aphorism; and The Body Electric, An Anatomy of the New Bionic Senses. And to boot, amateur juggler. Welcome to Specifically for Seniors, James. It's great to have you on.
Well, thank you so much, Larry, and thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
And we're very glad to have you. Let's start with your journalism background first. You're the editor of the quarterly print publication from the Nieman Foundation. What's the Nieman Foundation? What's the purpose?
Yeah, the Nieman Foundation will be 85 years old this year, celebrating its 85th anniversary. And it's a fellowship for professional journalists at Harvard University. Each year, about 24 journalists, about half from the U.S. and about half from outside the U.S., come to Harvard for an academic year to work on research and study plans that have to do with furthering their goals and ambitions in journalism. So I was a Nieman Fellow back in 2011, 2012, and just finished 10 years as deputy curator of the Nieman Foundation. And Nieman Fellows come to Harvard and they spend an academic year auditing courses and steeping themselves in their study plans, and the foundation itself also has a kind of curriculum that is focused on journalism and enhancing the professional skills of the journalists who come to the Nieman Foundation.
How did your journalism background lead to your interest in aphorisms, metaphors, puns, or was it the other way around, or
Yeah.
what?
It's kind of both ways round, actually. When I was a child growing up, there were very few books in our house, but there were 2 primary sources of reading material, and I was an avid reader as a child. And the first one was Time magazine, and ironically enough, I ended up working for Time magazine. My parents were regular subscribers, and we used to keep the magazine in the bathroom where everyone had a chance to read it during trips to the bathroom, and that's where I first encountered journalism. And the second source of reading material was Reader's Digest magazine. That was also kept in the bathroom, which doubled as our library in our house. And in Reader's Digest, I first encountered quotable quotes, which is a page in every print edition of the magazine, which has just kind of a list of quotations, usually from celebrities, sometimes from writers. And I was 8 years old. I remember this very distinctively when I encountered the quotable quote section. And I still remember the first quotable quote that I read in Reader's Digest. And it was, "The difference between a rut and a grave is the depth." And I had no idea that was an aphorism, a short, witty, philosophical saying when I was 8 years old. but as an avid young reader, just beginning to become interested in reading books and things like that, that phrase always stuck with me, and the quotable quotes always stuck with me. And when I was older, a teenager, and taking literature classes in high school and things like that, I started collecting aphorisms. So my love for aphorisms, which are basically work by metaphor, my love for aphorisms, metaphor, and wit can be traced back to those two early reading experiences with Reader's Digest and Time magazine, and both of those publications ended up being crucial crucial for my future professional career as a journalist and as an author. And I do think they inform each other. Aphorisms and metaphor and journalism, writing in general, really has everything to do with how you use metaphor and figurative language to communicate complex ideas. And that's crucial for journalism, but also crucial for all kinds of writing.
At this point, I'm going to credit my son who wrote my favorite aphorism.
Oh, excellent.
All waffles have squares, and there's nothing you can do about it. So
that's a great one.
You had an aphorism collection as a kid?
Absolutely. I had, like many teenagers, I had posters of rock stars on my bedroom walls. I was particularly fond of Pink Floyd and David Bowie and George Harrison. And when I started collecting aphorisms, I took the posters off the wall and turned the picture to face the wall and hung it back up. And I started writing the aphorisms on the back of the posters. So within a few years, my room was covered with aphorisms written on the back of these posters. I still have those posters; they're right over there, and that's how my collecting got started. And it's a very I was going to say it's a very commonplace activity, and the results of people who collect sayings and quotations and aphorisms are called commonplace books, and they have a very, very long history in literature of scholars and philosophers, but also just ordinary folks who came across words to live by, like the one you quoted from your son, and wanted to preserve them somehow so that they could refer to them again. And that's what led to the creation of commonplace books in the Middle Ages. And the commonplace books of the Middle Ages are the ancestors of the quotes for the day and the daily diaries with quotes on them that we see today. You go through the checkout at the grocery store around Christmas time, and you'll always find those kind of quotation books there and calendars with memorable sayings and things like that. So it's a very, very long tradition that I kind of inadvertently stepped into thanks to Reader's Digest.
Just so we can define an aphorism clearly, you have 5 laws that define aphorisms.
Yes, those are the 5 laws of the aphorism, which I very grandly titled them the 5 laws of the aphorism, but I completely made them up myself, and reasonable people can disagree. Let's see if I can remember them now. It has to be short. An aphorism is brief. It's 1 or 2 sentences at the most, like a short paragraph. It has to be personal. It has to have an identifiable author. I never let school interfere with my education. Mark Twain. But other sayings like "Let sleeping dogs lie," that originally had an author back in the dark mists of time, but over centuries of use, the identity of the author has been worn away, and so it becomes a proverb. It must be definitive. So like your son's aphorism doesn't say, under certain circumstances, the following may be true, or if the conditions are right, this or that may be the case. It's very definitive. Again, never let school interfere with your education does not equivocate. It's just very direct. And the last two laws are: it must be philosophical, and it must have a twist. So aphorisms, I think, are different from cliches or the kind of things you might get or read in a greeting card. Aphorisms don't make you feel good about yourself. They make you think, they make you question your beliefs, and they make you just kind of pause. They have a sort of philosophical component to them, and often have a literary or psychological twist. No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. That's an aphorism by Stanislaw Lec, a Polish writer from the 1960s, and that's, for me, is a great, it's first of all, it's 100% metaphor. There's nothing if you think about the literal meaning of that sentence or any of the words in it, it doesn't make any sense at all. So it's 100% metaphor, but it also has a kind of psychological twist to it, and it's very philosophical. It's a pretty perceptive comment on groupthink and the power of mass psychology, or buying into mass psychology. So those are the 5 laws. Those are the 5 characteristics that define an aphorism.
Do they have to be true?
Nope, they don't have to be true, and they can also be contradictory. There are misery loves company. You can have. I'm trying to think of examples that contradict each other. You'll find aphorisms that promote the virtue of solitude, for example. But you also find aphorisms that promote the virtue of solidarity and community. And both those things are true in certain circumstances. So an aphorism has a psychological or philosophical truth to it, while it may be factually irrelevant, or it may be factually a non sequitur. And some people will find certain aphorisms true for themselves, and some people will find those not applicable to themselves. But that is, I think, dependent on the person and the person's situation. Like the first aphorism I read in Reader's Digest: the difference between a rut and a grave is the death. As an 8-year-old boy, that didn't mean much to me. I was intrigued by the way that the language was used, and I was fascinated by that, but I didn't quite know what it meant. So for me, that was not true at the time. Later on, as I had various jobs and various experiences in life, the difference between a rut and a grave became very, very true, and very, very poignant, and very, very pointed for me. So I think the truth of an aphorism really depends on the life situation that you're in when you first encounter it.
I mentioned you were an amateur juggler. You juggle while you're reciting your 5 laws of aphorisms? Why?
Sorry, why?
Why?
Just because it's fun, and I think juggling is. I love to juggle. It's great for your mental and physical health, and it looks a lot harder than it is. I had a friend when I lived in Amsterdam who actually wrote a story about him and his company in which he taught people how to juggle. And as part of the research for that story, he taught me to juggle, and I've kept juggling ever since. But for me, juggling is a metaphor for aphorisms, for wit, and how we as human beings are constantly juggling meanings in our mind. So if you think of a joke or a pun or something like that, there's, for a pun, for example, there's multiple meanings active in your mind at the same time. There's a great pun by a 17th century aristocrat who, I think it was King Louis XVI. He was out strolling in the garden at Versailles or some chateau somewhere, and he encountered the king. And this aristocrat was famous for his wit and for his ability to make puns on the spot. And the king encountered him all of a sudden in the garden out for a walk, and he said to this guy, You, who are so good at making puns, make a pun on me right now. And without stopping a beat, this guy said, the king is not a subject. So when you think about that pun, the word king and subject have multiple meanings. And what makes a pun make you laugh or make you groan is your perception of those multiple meanings simultaneously at the same time. And that's what juggling is. You've got three balls and you're keeping them all in the air all at the same time. And when you're doing that, you're able to, if you watch someone when they're juggling, they're not looking at individual balls. They're looking at the whole space in front of them. And if you were, as a juggler, to focus on individual balls, you would drop them all, because you have to keep your attention on the whole field, and you have to know where all three balls are at all times. And the only way to do that is by having this diffuse, very broad attention. It's very, very intense attention and very focused attention, but it's very broad. And so your ability to juggle depends on being able to see all those balls, three balls at the same time, just like your ability to get a pun or a joke, to understand that, or to make a pun or a joke, is the ability to hold multiple meanings of words in your mind at the same time.
Let's move on to metaphors. Can you define a metaphor simply?
Yes. Asking me to define a metaphor simply is a very difficult question, but thank you for it, Larry. A metaphor is, well, I think Aristotle came up with the best definition. A metaphor is when you give the name of one thing to something else. And a very famous example is Juliet is the sun from Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's great play. And Juliet is the sun. There's a mathematical equation that you could use for that, is X equals Y. And at its simplest, a metaphor is just giving one thing a name that belongs to something else. And usually it's that thing, you're giving the thing a name that you already know. So you know what the sun is like and what the sun does, but you don't know what Juliet is like and what Juliet does. So you give the thing that you know, the name of the thing that you know, you give that to something that you don't know. And when you do that, you don't just transfer the name, but you transfer a whole kind of very complex and extensive network of associations and analogies. And so the things that you understand about the sun, it's bright, it's life-giving, it's warm, it's hot. You transfer those things onto the thing you don't know, Juliet. And that's how metaphor teaches us or makes us able to comprehend or get some insight into the unknown, things that are new. Like you're on a computer right now, I'm on a computer right now. What do we call what we're looking at right now? We call it a desktop. And that's a metaphor for something that we understand. We understand what a desk is. People use desks. But when computers were first invented, people didn't understand them or how to use them. So that we created a metaphor. And we said, well, there's going to be a desktop and you're going to have files and there's going to be a trash can. And essentially the whole computer use metaphor is transferring what we understand about desks to how we interact with this new thing called a computer. So that's a really good example of how metaphor is very simple and it seems obvious, but it actually is very complex. And when you're using a metaphor, and we're using them all the time, anytime we talk or even think about abstract notions, emotions, feelings, ideas, we have to use metaphor because we understand things through being able to make them concrete and be able to visualize them. So, yeah, you can say, well, that's very simple. Desktop computer, yes, I understand. But underneath the name is a whole network of complex associations, sort of like the roots of a tree, that they go deep into the ground and they're connected to all kinds of other things and all kinds of other plants in your garden. and I've just used the metaphor to describe metaphor.
So you could ask Facebook, what is metaphor?
Ah, yes,
Yep, but that's a pun.
that,
So,
that, that's a pun. That's a pun. And you've
okay,
just struggled. You've just made us all juggle mentally, Larry.
I I've got to stop doing that. Um,
I no, I think you should continue to do it because, yeah, that's what keeps your mind agile and nimble.
in more recent times, you mentioned that Elvis used metaphors frequently.
Yeah, and Elvis, well, any kind of popular music, it's filled with metaphors. My favorite Elvis song is All Shook Up. And if you were to kind of take the lyrics to that song and analyze them as a piece of literature, it's just one, it's one metaphor after another. Um, I'm all shook up. Um, my love is like a buttercup. Her lips are like a volcano that's hot. Um, when you use the word like or as, that's a simile. Um, of course, it's a slightly different form of figurative language, but in my thinking, a simile is just a metaphor with the scaffolding still up. So, Elvis is in that song is just using a string of metaphors again, like Shakespeare, to describe his feelings for this person. And of course, Elvis himself has become a metaphor for so much. And I think the phrase "Elvis has left the building" has become a catchphrase and is used in all kinds of different circumstances. And it's really a metaphor for something that has come to an end. Some momentous event is over, and people just say Elvis has left the building, and we all understand what that means because we all know Elvis and we all have the metaphorical context to understand those references.
So metaphors are really an essential part of language.
Yes, and I think it's very hard to overstate how important metaphors are. They are, yeah, they're even more than essential. They are the basis of language. It's not like they're essential, but you could have some stripped down form of language that didn't contain metaphors. It would be very, very hard to communicate anything like of complexity, like feelings or thoughts or ideas, without using metaphor. If you just look at the news, I mean, what's in the news this morning? The talk about the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling, it's a metaphor. The ceiling, debts don't have ceilings, but we use that metaphor to help us understand a very, very complex financial situation for the United States. Um, and the debt ceiling is a kind of simplification and condensation of all the complexity that's going on behind the scenes in those negotiations. If you just listen to the words that I'm speaking and the words that you're speaking, I just used a phrase "behind the scenes." That's another metaphor. So we use metaphors unconsciously and instinctively, and so much of our language is metaphorical. Um, we don't even realize that we're using metaphors most of the time. There's been one estimate that we use in ordinary conversation, we use about 6 metaphors a minute. But I think that's an underestimate. Um, so, and even very simple words like to comprehend. If you think about the etymology of words like comprehend, um, they're metaphors. Comprehend, the original meaning of the word means to grasp or to grab something. So a lot of metaphors are based on physical actions. Um, like I hear what you're saying means I understand you. To comprehend, to grasp something, also means to understand someone. Do you see what I mean? That's another metaphor where we're using seeing to be a metaphor for understanding. So language is rooted deeply in metaphor. Rooted is another metaphor. You just can't you just can't stop using them, and we would not be able to communicate with each other in the kind of rich, emotionally dense way that we do without metaphor.
And the way something is metaphorically defined can actually change the way you perceive the subject,
That's
like
right.
in financial markets.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. We're talking of the inflation is in the news so much, and the debt ceiling negotiations and default and things like that. If you listen to or read um, any news really, but financial news in particular, pay attention to the metaphors. When stock prices are rising, for example, they will be described using metaphors of living things. So stock prices are climbing or soaring. And what climbs, what soars? Living things climb, living things soar, animals, people, birds. When stock prices are falling, they plummet like a stone or fall like a brick or fall off a cliff. Those metaphors, those kind of metaphors have to do with dead things, things that are or inanimate objects, and um, those metaphors also trigger, just as we were talking about earlier, how metaphors trigger a complex network of associations. They also trigger emotions that go along with those associations. So when something is plummeting like a stone or falling like a brick or falling off a cliff, that's got an emotional connotation that is kind of scary and kind of alarming, whereas something that's soaring and climbing has a positive connotation. So studies have been done that looked at how people react to the use of those kind of metaphors when it comes to stock prices and finance. And people have greater expectations that when something is described as climbing or soaring, that it will continue to climb and continue to soar because it's a living thing, and that's what living things do. And the opposite for falling like a stone or plummeting like a brick. Those things will stay down and stay dead because that's what inanimate objects do. But actually, stock prices fluctuate all the time. And one of the basic tips for smart investing is not to be emotionally involved in any individual stock price movement, to try and look at them over time. So, and this is another connection with journalism, if we want to present information accurately and not inappropriately influence, even subconsciously, how people are reacting to stock price movements, we should describe them in as neutral a way as possible. I don't think it's possible to describe them completely neutrally, because everything is ultimately metaphorical, but you could say, stock prices rose or they fell, or they increased or they decreased. That has just listen to those words as compared to soaring and climbing or falling or plummeting. They have a different emotional connotation. And I think that's true for all kinds of social issues, political issues, to be very, very conscious and deliberate in the choice of metaphors that we use to describe these things, because those metaphors frame, literally, that's another metaphor, frame, it's the best metaphors are both literally and metaphorically true. But the choice of language frames an issue, and you just have to read the news and look at the different ways that politicians from different political parties describe the same issues or the same events, and they choose totally different words. And those different words, those different metaphors, activate different emotions in the people who hear them. And politicians are doing that deliberately. they are deliberately attempting to influence how we think. But the more aware we are of the metaphors that we use, the more aware we are of the metaphors that other people use, then the more aware we are of how they're trying to influence us, and the better able we will be to make our own decisions apart from those associations that other people are placing on us by the metaphors that they use. It's not like we won't feel those associations. We always feel them, even if it's unconscious, but making them conscious enables us to step back and say, okay, I see why politician X is using this word to describe this issue. And that triggers me in a particular positive or negative way. But I can step back from that because I can see what that person is doing and I make my own decision.
Moving on.
There's another metaphor, Larry. Moving on.
Many websites have an FAQ page, frequently asked questions. You have an FUQ page, frequently unasked questions. This segues nicely into talking about puns and wit. Forgive me. Why does wit matter?
Yeah. Wit matters because I think it's related to metaphor in the sense that wit is also wit is like juggling as well. It's making combinations of different things and being able to take information from very disparate fields and combine them into something new. So if you think about like scientific discovery or artistic creation, for me, wit is the ability to combine things from unexpected places to create something new. So a great example would be like someone like Picasso, who in the realm of art, who in some of his work just kind of found objects and like a bicycle handlebars from a bicycle and a seat from a bicycle, and he combined them in new ways to make a sculpture of a bull. And that for me is a great demonstration of the human mind's ability to synthesize information from different sources and so that's kind of the input, and have the output be something fresh, new, original, creative, whether it's a work of art or a piece of literature or a pun, because a pun is the same thing. It's being able to take these different meanings of words that sound the same and to create something new that relies on combining those different meanings in unexpected ways.
You claim that a pun is the highest form of wit. I agree, but why?
Why? Because it's I think because it's a demonstration of the principle of the mind's creative potential. There's Charles Lamb was a 19th century English poet, and he was friends with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And Charles Lamb, they both lived in London and were friends. And Charles Lamb was a very shy person, and Coleridge invited him over for dinner one evening, and he just wanted him to kind of engage in conversation and not be as shy as he typically was in social gatherings. So Coleridge said to Lamb, "Please come for dinner, but don't be so sheepish." And Lamb said to Coleridge, "I will." So that you can think of that as just kind of like harmless banter between friends, but the ability to make those kind of connections in the moment is the essence of wit, because it is that sort of combinatory play. Albert Einstein talked about his scientific method as combinatory play, taking pieces of information and throwing them in the air and mixing them up and shaking them up and juggling them around, playing with them to produce new ideas and new theories. And so why I think puns are the highest form of wit is because they demonstrate that wit is something that we all have and that we all do instinctively. So, Coleridge and Lamb had that kind of punning friendship that led to that encounter. But the fact that you and I understand those puns means we are thinking the same way. And what's amazing about puns, and this is true of jokes as well, is that the level of wit required to make a pun is the same as the level of wit required to understand a pun. So the person who makes the pun and the person who understands the pun are actually engaging in the same creative activity, because a pun or a joke is never explained. I didn't explain the relationship between lamb and sheepish and wool, but you got it, I got it. So that means that that combination is taking place in my brain when I make the pun, but the same activity is taking place in your brain when you get the pun. And there's no explanation. There's no kind of like, well, this has to do with that. And as we all know, having to explain a joke destroys the joke. So my theory of puns is that the highest form of wit is because they demonstrate that wit is just the way we think, and that everybody has this ability, and everybody is actually using it all the time. They're just not conscious of it.
And you talked about Abraham Lincoln used puns.
Yeah, and often, you seem to be a pun fanatic like me, Larry, and often our family members, friends, don't appreciate our puns as much as we appreciate our puns. But I think people who are prone to punning are kind of, in a way, celebrating this creative ability of language, not just of language, but of the human mind. And I think also puns can help us keep our, when you talk about wit, how do we use the word wit? You want to keep your wits about you. You want to live by your wits. So wit is kind of essential to just functioning in life and different situations. And I think puns, kind of like I was saying earlier, keep your mind fresh and keep it agile, but also keep it flexible, because you have to. What is life but dealing with a series of unexpected events? And so Abraham Lincoln, while he was president, was always punning, and some might consider that like offensive or trivial because he's got so much more serious things to consider. But for me, it was an example of his equilibrium and his mental toughness and his mental resilience, being able to pun like he did under the pressure that he was under. This was during the Civil War. So one example, he was walking down the street with, actually, I think it was his Secretary of Defense at the time, and they came across a sign that said, just a shop sign, and his Secretary of Defense read it out loud, T.R. Strong, and T.R. Strong was the name of the shopkeeper. And Lincoln immediately said, yeah, tea are strong, but coffee are stronger. So that's a silly pun. But for me, it's, like I said, an evidence of Abraham Lincoln's ability to keep his wits about him, literally and figuratively, at a time of immense pressure and immense strain and immense stress. And I think that's what is important for all of us, because we all have experiences of stress and pressure and crisis, and keeping your wits about you is essential to getting through those crises. And it also has to do with aphorisms, Larry, because when I'm experiencing moments of crisis or doubt, aphorisms come to me. And they kind of are signposts on the way through a situation, to guide me through a situation. One of my favorites is from Winston Churchill, again, during World War II, a man with a lot on his mind, and at a moment of intense crisis. And one of the things that he said that I always remember is, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Or that day in March, Pi Day in March, pi r square, the formula, and
Yes.
the response is no, pi are round, brownies are square. So,
Exactly.
So aphorisms, metaphors, wit all fit into great writing.
Yes, I think they do. And I think Ralph Waldo Emerson, a great American philosopher and aphorist, he said, writing is thinking. And that is something that I also believe. And like I was just saying about wits, when you're keeping your wits about you and you're living by your wits, that there are certain characteristics about that transfer into writing. So the first one is concision. Keeping things very concise and very precise and concise are, in my opinion, kind of fundamental values of really good writing. This is especially important in journalism, where you're trying to communicate facts in a kind of brisk, um, accessible way. But it's also true for all forms of writing, where one of the key challenges is to keep people's attention. Whether you're writing a novel, a memoir, nonfiction, journalism, concision of presentation and precision of description are absolutely key. And those are also characteristics of aphoristic writing and witty thinking. And by witty thinking, I don't mean being funny. Um, Being funny is one form of wit, but witty thinking is just being sharp and creative and resourceful with the ingredients that you have. I think metaphor is another key component of strong writing, and again, it's because I think this is true of all kind of all art forms. You don't want to, like, if you're writing a novel, you don't want, or you're making a film, you don't want to show too much. You don't want to explain too much. You want to give the reader enough information to create that world in their own minds. So, and that's what a metaphor does. So the metaphor of no snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. That's just one sentence. Maybe it's 12 words, but within that sentence is an entire novella, really. There's characters in there, there's tension, there's dynamics. And I think what metaphoric language and figurative language more broadly does in strong writing is give the reader enough information to create a world in their own minds without over explaining or under explaining. So leaving something to the imagination of the reader is crucial to sustaining attention for a piece of writing. And finally, I think another aspect that has to do with wit, but also one of the 5 laws of the aphorism, is giving things a twist, having things have a surprise. And that could be a plot twist or a really inventive turn in the story, but it could also just be a linguistic flair, just the way you play with words. There's another metaphor and another example of how creativity and play are closely aligned. So, having some kind of unpredictability and surprise as part of really strong writing, I think is essential. And again, that keeps the reader kind of leaning forward into the text rather than kind of thinking back and saying, oh, I get it, and I know I kind of figured out what's going to happen next. We all had that experience. You're watching a film or a TV show or reading a novel, and you kind of think, oh yeah, I see where this is going. But really strong writing keeps you on your toes, keeps the reader on their toes, and delivers kind of some kind of surprising wit or wisdom or takeaway.
What do you want to say about your books? I'm gonna leave it up to you.
What do I want to say about my books? Well, I think I've written two books about aphorisms. One is a kind of history of the aphorism, the world in a phrase. It's also partly a memoir about my life with aphorisms, and a lot of kind of major life events for me have been bound up with aphorisms. And the second book about aphorisms is an anthology. That's Geary's Guide to the World's Great Aphorists. And then the metaphor and the wit book for me have kind of grown out of my work on aphorisms. Because in thinking about aphorisms, writing those books, I thought, how do aphorisms work? Like, where do they come from? And I realized that they work mostly by metaphor. And the best aphorisms, like we were saying earlier, they don't really have anything that literally makes sense in them. But they create this rich, vivid image that contains a lot of psychological insight, philosophical wisdom. And they do that through metaphor. And then thinking through, when I was researching and writing the metaphor book, I was thinking, like, well, where does metaphor come from? Like, how does that work? And that's what led me to wit. And metaphor is one expression of wit, but for me, wit is sort of the operating principle of the human mind and this combinatory play that produces metaphors, that produces aphorisms, that produces all kinds of social, political, scientific, artistic innovation. So I think the thing that I'd like to say about the books is that, in a way, they're all related. At least in my mind, they all kind of are connected to this understanding of language and creativity and the human mind is all kind of intertwined in a really deep way that we're practicing every single day. Like, metaphor is not just for poets. Shakespeare is not the only one using metaphor. We use metaphor all the time, every single day. Wit is not just something that stand-up comedians have or Einstein. We all live by our wits every day, and wit is something that we're constantly relying on. So that's what, for me, is, I think, the most important thing, is that these grand philosophical concepts and high forms of literature are actually things that we're all experts in, that we're all using every day, and that are kind of active in our minds all the time.
If you are interested in purchasing any of James' books, the links are in the show notes below. James, it's been fun. It's been educational. It's been fascinating. Thanks so much for coming on Specifically for Seniors.
Thank you for having me, Larry. It was really my pleasure.
If you found this podcast interesting, fun, or helpful, tell your friends and family, and click on the follow or subscribe button. We'll let you know when new episodes are available. You've been listening to Specifically for Seniors. We'll talk more next time. Stay connected.